Good day, you beautiful bunch. Today I am going to take you through the process for the last video that I did, and this is essentially just like a breakdown of how I did what I did. It's not so much a tutorial really, I'm just gonna show you some stuff I did, you know, because we all really just wing things, don't we? Just me? Oh, fair enough. I'm gonna show you how I went from this to this via the Photoshops. We'll go to a magic wonderland together, and it will probably be horrendous. So anyway, these are all the images that I grabbed. I have a picture of the lady digging into some food. I have a plate of food, sort of food, it's like salad and stuff. I got a 3D render of a bullet, which I grabbed from Envato Elements. Thanks, Envato. I wanted to get her tongue sticking out because she has to look like she really wants to dig into this bullet. So I found this picture of another lady with her tongue out, so I'll use her tongue on this tongue. Anyway, you'll see. I start with dropping my image into Photoshop and scale it to roughly the sort of size that I want to do. I then duplicate that layer. Always duplicate things, so if you do anything stupid, you're going to be able to go back and fix it if things go wrong. After I've duplicated the layer, the first thing I want to do, because I'm going to turn our character into a sort of a caricature, I'm going to start blowing up certain bits, making bits bigger, making bits smaller. So I'm going to start with the eyes. So I'll select the lasso tool, go around the eye, make that selection, and then copy and paste that eye so it appears above the original layer. I'll then hit Command T for a free transform tool, and then make it a little bit bigger and muck around with it until I get a sort of size that feels like it works. Just dish around, get it in the right position, boom. Then go back down to our main layer, make the selection, copy and paste again, Command T for transform, and same thing again. Just going around. Okay, sweet. Couple of little fine adjustments. That little eye looks a bit odd, doesn't it? So final adjustments. Okay, then I add a mask to the eyes, get a brush, make it nice and soft, relatively large. Go onto the mask, make sure black is selected, and then brush lightly around the eyes, just to get rid of those harsh edges and let it blend into the rest of the face. Isn't that lovely? I now want to move on to embellishing other elements onto her face, and to do that I'm going to use the liquefy tool. So before I do that, I'm going to take everything that we've created so far, so those two massive eyes and the original photo, and I'm going to merge those layers. I'm then going to go to filter and liquefy. Okay, so I'm going to start by selecting the bloat tool on the toolbar to the left, and I'm just going to very lightly bulge up the eyes, ever so slightly. Bulge them up, that'll do. Just to make her a little less realistic, a little more cartoony. Now, the really clever thing in Photoshop is when you have added a picture of a face in Liquify, it recognizes where the eyes are, where the nose are, where the nose is, where the mouth is, blah blah blah. So you can use these sliders just to increase, the width, the height, various different parts of the face. So now we're going to just do a little mucking around with these until we end up where we are. I want her to have big eyes, big mouth, sort of slightly big cheeks, and then her face to kind of taper inwards as it gets down towards her mouth and her chin. That's the kind of image I have in my head, so I'm just going to muck around until I get something like that. As you're mucking around as well, you'll notice some things really don't work. Okay, she's looking sufficiently ridiculous at this point. Now I want to fatten up her cheeks, right? But I don't want what I'm about to do to influence the way the eyes, the nose, or the mouth look. So there's a handy little tool at the side called Freeze. I'm going to click on that and then paint over the areas I don't want to touch. Effectively, this now means if I select the bloat tool again and make her cheeks a bit bigger, it won't affect any of the areas that I've just frozen. Look at that. Like magic. Make her chin a little bit bigger. And then I can go over to the Thaw tool, and you've guessed it, then just thaws out the areas I've just frozen and allows me to continue as normal after that. So a couple of tiny little extra adjustments, and I think we have ourselves a stupid enough face. Let's crack on. Here's the before and after, just so you can see the changes. Okay, that's lovely, but you can't have a face like this and not make the head disproportionately larger than the body. So duplicate the layer once more, because again, if we do anything daft, we can go back nice and easily. I'm going to grab our lasso tool again and go roughly around the head and the hair. Make a nice little selection. Gonna copy and paste that. And again, with our free transform tool, make it large. Place it back into a position that looks semi-natural. Obviously nothing about what we're doing here is natural, but still gotta look like it belongs on top of that body. So plonk it right there. Now, I want our hair to be falling nicely behind the plate. So at the minute it sits a little bit odd, so I'm just gonna grab the warp tool and muck around with these anchor points to just squeeze it in a little bit so it falls nicely behind the plate that I am literally about to drop in. I'm going to create a mask on this layer, and with a soft round brush I am going to go around the head to get rid of obviously all of the excess from our selection. Now you don't have to worry about this being too carefully selected at this point. You'll see why later. We'll just go around, clean all those edges up. Lovely stuff. Wonderful. Right, let's merge these puppies together again and duplicate them once more, just to be safe. You know, it's good to be safe. It's at this point I realized something that I probably should have done earlier, and that is isolate her from her background, because I'm an idiot. All I did was hit W on the keyboard and grab the select subject tool at the end, and that did a pretty good job of cutting her out from her background. So I then just create another mask on the layer and she is on her own. Just grab a little solid color to throw into the background there just to check that she doesn't look too ridiculous. And it's actually done a pretty bang up job, so I'm happy with that. Right, let's add our plate of food in, shall we? Okay, drag it up above her, and I'm going to let's make this the sort of size that we want. I'm going to lower the opacity there just so I can see what's behind. Drop it in place. Looking nice. Now obviously we need to get rid of everything else that's in this image because I just want that plate of salady goodness. P for the pen tool, and let's go around our plate. Nice easy shape. So this is probably the easiest way to do this. Just create a little path around the edges of our plate. Alright, all sorted. Let's make our selection and apply a trusty mask. Boom! Background gone, plate in position. Okay, plate's just floating in midair. Let's fix that. Fix that with a table. Drop her in. Get her to the size we want. Scoop, 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 scoop. Alright, grab trusty pen tool again. Fling a little path around the table. Mask it out. There we go, let's drop this bad boy into position. Go, sits nicely there. I do want her hand to appear behind the table though. So this is a nice quick fix. I'm just going to command click on the mask of the table, then go back to the mask we created on our character. Now I can grab my black brush again and just paint out that little section of hand, and voila, her hand is behind the table. Okay, now on to bullet time. This is the bullet I grabbed from Envato Elements, so I'm going to just drop that in onto our canvas. I'm going to get free transform. I'm going to make it a little shorter and stumpier. I want this to look like a little bit more of a comical piece, this, you know, if you hadn't already guessed. So a little stubbier. I'm going to flip it horizontally, throw it into the rough sort of position that I wanted to go in on top of this food. Right, I'm going to apply a mask to the bullet, lower its opacity. What we need to do is make it appear, obviously, like it's sitting on the plate. So what I'm going to do is grab a decently hard brush, and I'm going to paint over these sections of food. And I'm going to pretend for a moment that I know what any of these are, like I might eat healthily. So let's say here's a cucumber and a bit of salmon. And then this is going to be, let's say, squash. Yeah. I'll probably cut all this out because I have no idea what I'm talking about at this point. So once we've gone over all the food, you can see now, but it looks like it's part of the plate of food. Just because we've kind of, it's on top of some bits, it's behind some bits, it's part of the whole piece. It's gorgeous. Now I'm going to be a good boy and name my layers. Because, you should all do that. If you don't already. Later on, when we've got tons of adjustment layers going on and bits and bobs, it can become very confusing if you don't know what everything is. So I highly recommend being neat and orderly with one's layers, because I do it all the time. Definitely not just when I'm filming videos. Definitely not. I'm going to match the tones now, so I'm going to put a hue and saturation layer above everything else and whack the saturation right down so everything becomes black and white. This is a nice simple way to see if everything is kind of matching in terms of its tones. So obviously in this piece, we can tell the main character in this piece, and she also takes up the bulk of the image. So we're going to use her to predominantly conduct our direction of light. So her light is coming from above. So she's got shadow below, her light's coming from above. So everything else in the piece is going to have to reflect that same lighting situation. So using that, I'm going to grab a curves adjustment and I'm going to clip it to my image. I'm going to start with a bullet, make it a teensy bit darker. Looking at these 4 different images now, as they're all put together, as they're all beside each other, you can see the bits that don't match, and without having to worry too much about matching color at this point, we're just going to match the overall tone. So now on top of the plate, I'm going to make the plate a touch darker. Then again, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, throw a curves adjustment on top of the table, and the table will become a little tinge darker as well. And this will just, as a little starting point, make these 4 individual shots just sit nicely within one another. Now if I turn off the hue and saturation layer, you can just see they sit a little bit better together. So don't need you anymore, get in the bin. Now this is going to be quite a comical image, so the next thing I'm going to do is draw a face on the bullet itself. So layer above, just going to grab a brush, sample a dark area inside the bullet, and just going to draw on a nice little mouth to begin with. Then I'm going to choose my ellipse tool and create a couple of comical eyes. This dude does not want to be eaten, which I think is true of most things that exist. Nothing really wants to be eaten, does it? Does it? I don't think so. Muck around with the eyes. We're also going to muck around, give this guy some eyelids, and then some more detail on the eyes. Add a couple of eyebrows, because what's a bullet without eyebrows? I hear you scream. Okay, and there's the basis of our bullet face. Okay, what happens next, Dave? You say. I'm going to work on shadows. So we're going to work our way from the bottom up. So I'm going to start from the table, which is the lowermost surface, and the object sitting directly above it is the plate. So I'm going to sample the darkest area in the table, so the darkest color that currently sits on the table. I'm going to choose myself a brush, set it nice and soft, nice and big, and lightly paint on a layer directly below the plate. Just a nice little shadowy there. It's just being cast from the light above to the table. And instantly that plate looks like it's more part of this scene. That was terrible English. Reduce the fill a tiny little bit, and there you go. Gorgeous. Call it shadow, because we're naming things. Alright, next shadow, if we're moving up the image, will be the shadow that the bullet should be casting on our salad. So this one, there's no one specific color here like on the table. So I'm just going to select something nice and dark. Again, create a layer just below the bullet. Nice soft brush again. And just paint below where it would be casting a little shadow on the food. Right, obviously now it's bleeding onto some of the food that it should be sitting behind. So a nice easy way to combat this is to command click on the mask that I created for the bullet itself, and that will select a lot of the food that I already cut out from the front of the bullet earlier. Click on the food and then create a mask from that selection on the shadow we've just created. Right, that'll get rid of the vast majority of it. The rest I can just go over and just get rid of these last little bits of shadow from anywhere it shouldn't already be sitting. Fantastic. Right, here's what else should be creating a shadow, and it is our subject, our lady. Command click on her mask, create a layer underneath, and fill it with black. Now with our free transform tool, I'm going to use that black shape we've just created, drag it down, and by hitting command and clicking on the edges of our frame, we can drag these out independently so they match the perspective of the table. Although we're creating something pretty daft, I still want it to have an element of realism. So we're going to drag this out. We're going to mask out the bits we don't need. Select our good friend Gaussian blur, blur it out a little bit, lower the opacity, mask it off, and I'm just going to very loosely erase some of the parts closest to us, because the shadow will lose its intensity the closer it gets to us. Now to create some shadow on the underside of our bullet. Now obviously the 3D render that we pulled in is lit fairly consistently around it, but now that we put it into this scene, the light's only coming from above, so the underside of it needs to be a little darker than it is. We're going to grab ourselves an exposure adjustment layer, throw it on top of the bullet and clip it to the bullet so it affects nothing else. We're going to drag it down to darken it. Once we've done that, we hit Command I to invert the selection. That turns the mask black and essentially hides everything that we've just created. We can then take a brush, a white brush, and paint back the darkness that we just applied, but only in the areas that we want it. So in other words, the underside of the bullet. Again, just nice little things like this to just bring the whole thing together. Every little helps. Okay, now let's get the tongue involved. Didn't think I'd be saying that today. Now we're going to add that tongue in from the image that I showed you earlier on. So we need to lose her existing tongue. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool, go around the lips and the teeth there, create a selection, sample the darkest part of the inside of her mouth, get a brush and then just brush away that little tongue. Bye. No more speaking for you. And then just make sure this blends in correctly. Just lower the size of my brush, brush away on the other bits that are quite obviously a different color, around the teeth, around the edges of the mouth. There we are. Nothing like a quick de-tonguing of an afternoon. Alright, let's bring in our other tongue. Out comes the lasso tool once more and go round this tongue. Yeah, God, this is gross. This is horrendous. I think she's been licking some stuff she shouldn't have been. Okay, we're going to mask that little bad boy out. So we're going to put it in position, tilt it so we're at the sort of angle we want. Then we're going to go to Edit, Transform and Warp. Muck around with the handles until we get it to round the sort of shape that we know we want it to be coming out of her mouth. Nice and quirky. She really wants to bite into this bullet, by the way, so she needs to look well up for it. There you go. If that isn't the tongue of someone who's up for it, then, you know, I don't know what is. Okay, pop it into position, apply a layer mask, and just soften up the edges. Softening up the edges of a tongue. It's great what you find yourself doing when you get into a deep Photoshop session. Okay, now we need to make it look like it's in her mouth, obviously. Same mask selected. It's a really soft brush. Give it the size of it and we're going to paint away this edge. Now obviously there's going to be a shadow cast from her teeth onto the tongue, so this works quite nicely. Just brush away underneath, follow the shape of her tongue around the edge there. There you go, bang in there. One thing, well, okay, a couple of things not quite right. You can probably spot them. First of all, the tongue looks like it has recently been detached from a dead person. There's no colour in it whatsoever when you compare it to the rest of her face. So we're going to add a hue and saturation layer, clip it to the tongue, and then we're going to just muck about with the saturation, the colour, and the lightness until we get something that more closely complements the rest of her head. There we go, that's looking nice. That makes me happy. Okay, this needs one more thing, just to fully put it in place. Again, think about where that light is coming from. That tongue's going to be casting a shadow on her chin. So let's make that happen. So create a layer above her head and underneath the tongue. Sample the darkest part of her skin. There's a nice little area just above the tongue for that. And then paint in a nice shadow underneath. Apply a blur to it. Stick it to multiply. Change the opacity a little bit. And I believe we have a tongue shadow. Okay, now I'm going to apply some of the similar techniques to the bullet's face. Add some layers underneath the features, sample darker colours to create some shadows, sample lighter colours to apply some highlights, just to bring the whole thing to life, create some depth. Now we're going to really work on bringing this to another level, a cartoony level. We're going to choose our mixer brush. Again, I'm going to reduce hardness. You'll see I have the mixer brush set to very wet, heavy mix. The wet is 100%, the load is 50, mix and flow are both 100%. And with another duplicated version of our layer, I'm simply going to start brushing around the skin to really, really smooth it out and just give that extra level of, what's the word? Anti-realism? Start around the eyes. Just follow the shape, follow the natural shape of the face as you're doing this. And there's like little areas around the eyes. We want to get that brush needs to kind of match that size. And as I'm going around the cheeks, I'm going to match the sort of the shape of the cheeks. Give it a bigger brush. You get used to this stuff when you do it. But I'm essentially now going to go around all of her skin, just smoothing out. Next up is the hair. So we've smoothed out the skin. Now we want to make the hair look a little less realistic, more sort of brushed on. For this I'm going to choose the smudge tool and a hairbrush. Again, these are the kind of things you can download. You'll find free downloads online, loads of things for hairbrushes. I've got this one again from Envato Elements. So, smudge tool selected. I'm just following the lines of the hair, and you'll see that it's just kind of smudging them all together, making them look a little less realistic and a little more like this is an actual cartoon human. At least that's sort of the theory. Okay, our background's looking a little dull, so I'm going to add a little gradient to that. Something that shows a little shine coming from behind her. Something that shows a nice little brighter color coming from behind her, darker in the sides. And as last little element, I want her to be really excited about the fact she's about to bite into this bullet. So I want her salivating. In order to do that, we're going to grab a splash brush. Again, you can find these online. These are ones I actually created myself earlier, which is why they look a little janky. But I'm going to get rid of all the, jankiness. Definitely not a word. So I painted it on using white. Got it into the position that I wanted, and then painted away all the excess stuff, all the nasty bits. Let's do that a second time for added salivationism. God, I'm inventing all the best words today. There we go, boom, that is a human ready to eat. We're going to add some final highlights and shadows to this. So in order to do that, we're going to grab a curves adjustment layer, clip it to our character, and pull it right down so it's nice and dark. Then we're going to hit Command I to invert it. That will make it vanish completely. Don't worry, we're going to brush it back in. We'll create one more. This one's going to be for the highlights. So this one we go nice and bright. Again, invert it. So everything we've just done is invisible, but we're about to grab a white brush and paint back in the bits that we want. Now we're going to paint in some highlights just to, give a bit of pop. Can't believe I've just said that. Again, we're going for this sort of, not so realistic look. More of a cartoony look, but we're really accentuating the lighter parts of this image just to bring them out a little bit more. Then we'll go along and do exactly the same with the shadows. Embellishing those lighter areas, embellishing those darker areas. Because with an image like this, subtlety can get in the bin. It's not what I'm about. Not today, son. Okay, so lastly, we need to apply a camera raw filter. This is where we just sort out all our last bits of lighting, our last bits of color, just to bring the whole thing together. So I'm going to create a layer on top of everything else. I'm going to hit Command Shift E, and that's going to merge every layer underneath it and apply it to one layer at the top, so we can apply this filter to just one layer. So filter, camera raw filter, and here she goes. Anybody who pretends to know what they're doing at this stage is quite frankly lying to you. This is complete play. Play around, see what you see. The more you do this, the more you will understand what these things actually do. So I'm going to play around with some sliders, blah 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 blah, until we end up with something a little like this. Ta-da! That's it, folks. A little breakdown for you there on the process I used on the piece for my last video. If you find this in any way useful, please do let me know. If you prefer that I did these a different way, just let me know. I could try a little something different. This is a new thing that I'm just testing out, just to see if it's of any use to anybody. If you're considering doing a piece like this, then some of the techniques I've used may be useful to you. Some of them you might want to disregard completely and just tell me I'm an idiot. You know, either way is fine. Okay guys, that is all for today. Until I see you in my next video, which will be at some point in the future, not the past. That's already happened. I love you long time. Goodbye.